Big Donor Squeeze, De-Harvarding the Academia. Written by Nitin Sawant. Joan Harris, the famous author of Chocolate, inadvertently offered a therapy lesson when she wrote, "A thing named is a thing tamed." Indeed, it is now regarded as a simple yet powerful way to take control of your thoughts and emotions by naming them, separating yourself from them, and viewing them more objectively. Though it's doubtful whether Ms. Harris had ever imagined that her process would also be used by corporations, high-net-worth donors, and varsity alumni networks to rein the rampaging antisemitism on the campuses of Harvard, post-October 7th Hamas' dastardly attack on Israel. Yes, they named and shamed and then defunded and flushed out the deracinated hate-mongers by literally taking the wheels off their gravy train. Ever since the Jewish donors and alumni stepped up to the plate, the antisemitists and the bigoted have gone in a downward spiral, ultimately culminating in the defenestration of Harvard head honcho Claudine Gay, and also driving the first decisive nail in the decrepit coffin of DEI crazy. It would be interesting to scratch the surface of this Taming Harvard campaign and look at a few insights into this whole dicey business of funding a tiny clique of extremely well-heeled institutions, and study whether the learnings can indeed be extrapolated and transferred from the fight against antisemitism to the fight against anti-Hindutva. Harvard versus the whole world. It is no secret that Harvard is the wellspring for all things academia. Trends, patterns, discourses, narratives, parleys, confabs, debates, critiques, treatises, syllabuses, all originate at Harvard and are taken forward by the various learning tributaries worldwide, just as Oxford set the tone for the world in the last century. Be it colonization, Anglophilia, Christian morals, Victorian virtues, or Shakespearean wit, it is the stamp of Harvard that qualifies the rules of social engagement in this century. Hence, it has always been important for power makers and opinion setters to control and regulate the discourse emanating out of Harvard. Harvard is a power center within all echelons of global power. Remember, Harvard counts 8 U.S. presidents, 4 sitting Supreme Court justices, and many global leaders among its alumni. It's the wealthiest university in the country with a $51 billion endowment. It boasts the highest credit rating and a fundraising operation that has brought in $1 billion annually since 2014. Indeed, Harvard's endowment is larger than the GDP of more than 120 nations, including countries such as Tunisia, Bahrain, and Iceland. It is richer than companies like General Motors, Coca-Cola, and Intel. The question arises, if Harvard is so rich, how could the donors hit them where it hurts? You can say Harvard has all the money in the world, but they don't, says Charles Flegar, who has overseen fundraising at Cornell and Johns Hopkins and now serves at Virginia Tech. They have a financial scholarship model that's best in class, world-class research and faculty, and you need that money to be a world-class institution. What that essentially translates into is that Harvard, without its donations, endowments, and financial gifts, is simply a fish out of water. And if the world needs to effect a course correction in how Harvard is being run, then the best way is to hold back the money. This is precisely what the Jewish donors and the Jewish alumni did. Why do millionaires donate to a billionaire Harvard? Officially, the rich often donate money to prestigious and already wealthy schools like Harvard for a few reasons. These donations can supposedly help fund scholarships and financial aid programs, making education more accessible to students from diverse socio-economic backgrounds. Donations also support research, faculty development, and infrastructure improvements, benefiting the academic community. In all probability, philanthropic giving to elite institutions makes sense as it enhances the donor's public image and legacy. One can argue all one likes, but the lure of seeing one's name on the plaque of an Ivy League institution of global repute beats all altruistic reasons to donate. They give money to Harvard or Stanford because all their friends pat them on the back, they get their name on a prestigious building, and they get associated with all of the incredible brand value of those institutions, says best-selling author Malcolm Gladwell. There is also the question of creating a path of least resistance for having their progeny acquire the Harvard hallmark. Take Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law and senior aide, who was admitted to Harvard after his father made a $2.5 million donation to the school, despite the younger Kushner's less-than-stellar high school academic record. Daniel Golden exposed Kushner's path to Harvard in 2006 in his book The Price of Admission: How America's Ruling Class Buys Its Way into Elite Colleges. In the book, Golden found that among a committee culled from Harvard's 400 biggest donors, half the big donors had a child enrolled at the school. The business reasons for donating to Harvard are compelling, too. Harvard alumni are stacked in practically every Fortune 500 giant at higher echelons, where decisions are made, policies are framed, contracts are awarded, and money changes hands. It is natural for any new business venture or a nouveau riche entrepreneur to spend a few millions in donations to open a backdoor to this elite old boy club and network directly with the who's who in his business niche. And for those riding on insane gains made in financial markets or stock market valuations, these donations also serve as a good way to extract tax breaks. Kenneth C. Griffin, a hedge fund billionaire who made a $300 million gift to Harvard's graduate program, got the program renamed the Harvard Kenneth C. Griffin Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. However, what he got was way beyond mere instant gratification. On the raw numbers, Griffin may have reduced his federal income tax bill by about $110 million through his donation to Harvard. The moot question is, who picks up the slack here? Unsurprisingly, the answer is you, the taxpayer. They donate, but you pay more. According to a 2015 Council for Aid to Education survey, nearly one-fifth of the record $40.3 billion raised by U.S. colleges and universities that year went to just 10 schools. Alumni and other individuals were the largest source of gifts, accounting for nearly 47% of the total. Through the tax deductions these donors claimed, taxpayers covered roughly $7.5 billion of the total donations. Do you understand the impact of these figures? That $7.5 billion is the very amount donors would have had to pay into the federal treasury were it not for the tax deductions. Could it be that wealthy private universities like Harvard deliver huge social benefits and help the communities within which they reside? Hardly. A 2020 Brookings Institution report found that public colleges contribute substantially more to upward mobility overall because they enroll many more students. By contrast, as scholars such as Devarian Baldwin have shown, the presence of wealthy private institutions tends to make their communities worse off by depriving municipalities of tax revenue, inflating the cost of housing, and creating private police forces that militarize surrounding neighborhoods. The victims include the working-class employees of these very universities, who often cannot afford to live near their workplace and can be excluded from assistance programs designed exclusively for faculty and high-level administrators. But can't private educational institutions be made to invest in the various initiatives of local bodies for public services, such as transportation, street cleaning, and public works? Some municipalities, including Massachusetts, have tried to address this exemption by introducing so-called pilot programs, or payments in lieu of taxes, through which governments make arrangements with large nonprofit organizations in their jurisdiction for voluntary contributions to offset some of the loss of tax revenue. But the pilot arrangement between Boston and Harvard, through which the university is supposed to annually contribute to the city a mere 25% of the property taxes it is exempt from paying, has been a total failure. Harvard has never actually paid the full amount of any of the city's annual pilot requests. Let's be honest in naming and shaming Harvard here. Whatever lofty claims they may make on their websites about the virtues of public service, such institutions are ultimately in it for themselves. Case in point. Even with a $50 billion endowment and all its tax breaks, Harvard has the audacity to charge the public for the privilege of visiting its museums. However, when Malcolm Gladwell went all out in a Twitter storm to openly criticize and question the millionaires donating to Harvard, branding it a moral crime, all the donors, including T. Boone Pickens and Mark Andreessen, ganged up to discredit Gladwell. Bill Ackman, a Pershing Square Capital and Harvard/HBS alum, was quick to point out, the leverage of helping build a great science and engineering school has global implications in a hugely positive way. This is not about subsidizing rich people. Gladwell was not convinced, though. That was hilarious, he said in an interview. Round up all these incredibly, really smart and sophisticated investors who have made billions of dollars and get them talking about a relatively complex social issue, and they sound like idiots. But come October 7, 2023, all the tables were turned. The global implications of supporting Harvard that Bill Ackman had so loftily envisaged turned out to be so negative that suddenly associating with Harvard became a disgrace, and even Bill Ackman had to lead the donor revolt that eventually forced Harvard's hand and led to the ouster of Ms. Claudine Gay. When donors turned off the tap, it would be naive to say that all was well with Harvard and other top U.S. universities until October 7th. DEI had crept into the syllabus from the fringes and had mainstreamed itself. Slowly but surely, Harvard & Co. had ceased to be a thought leader in innovation, research, and scholarship and had transmogrified into a purveyor of anti-racism, transgenderism, climate hysteria, defunding the police, kowtowing to China, land acknowledgements, indigenous rights, antisemitism and hatred of Israel, open borders, alternative energy, renaming buildings and tearing down statues, the 1619 Project, pronoun wars, Soros prosecutors, speech codes, disinvitations, cancel culture, patriarchy, the fight against trans-exclusionary radical feminists, anti-colonialism, microaggression fragility, and more. October 7th brought forth the rot and bigotry into the open, warts and all. While the stunned world was barely coping with the horror happening in Israel, it was also subjected to confront its warped white-collar mutation in the form of ugly student protests in the portals of prestigious American colleges. Although more than the insolent students, what irked them was the supercilious management that chose to defend their antisemitism and practically went all out to burn all bridges with their Jewish patrons. Payback for this comeuppance was swift. Kabi Barta, senior researcher of religious studies at Haifa University and an expert on American politics and strategy, says, "This is the first time we've seen Jews and Israelis seriously organizing themselves to shoot their arrows at the same time. The Ofer family came first, announcing the cessation of their donations to Harvard." A public appeal was also made by billionaire hedge fund CEO Bill Ackman, who said that one should not be able to hide behind a corporate shield when issuing statements supporting the actions of terrorists. The Wexner Foundation announced it would be terminating its 30-year relationship with Harvard School of Public Administration, constituting both a financial setback and a considerable blow to its reputation. It kept snowballing as more companies and businesspeople leveled criticism at Harvard, some withdrawing funding or threatening to sever ties with the university. Not that the donors were operating in a vacuum. Kenneth Griffin made sure to place a call to the head of the university's board, and in a private conversation with Penny Pritzker, senior fellow of the Harvard Corporation, Ken Griffin urged the university to come out forcefully in defense of Israel. Mr. Griffin wasn't alone in demanding that an elite university denounce its students for criticizing Israel so soon after the Hamas attack. Though some complaints, like that from Harvard's former president Larry Summers, were made in public, the most intense demands have come behind the scenes from Wall Street financiers who make up a powerful block of donors to schools, including the University of Pennsylvania, New York University, Stanford University, and Cornell University. The most significant impact, however, was felt when entrepreneurs joined hands to blacklist anti-Semitist students. Hedge fund manager Bill Ackman openly called on executives to refuse to hire students who are members of groups that have signed statements singling out Israeli violence as the cause of the conflict. Several law firms wrote an extremely fierce letter to the deans of law departments at prominent universities warning them, in naturally cautious legal language, that if they did not voice an unequivocal stance against antisemitism, the law firms would consider very carefully whether or not to employ their graduates. Ken Griffin was more categorical. Asked if his hedge fund Citadel would hire the head of a student group that signed the Harvard letter, his answer was an unequivocal no. "Unforgivable," he said. Since then, Ken Griffin has now paused all donations to Harvard over how it handled antisemitism on campus, saying that his alma mater is now educating a bunch of whiny snowflakes. When the volunteers volunteered away. For every Ken Griffin, Harvard also relies on thousands of fundraising volunteers, who cultivate smaller financial commitments, organize reunions, recruit students, and run alumni clubs far from the Cambridge, Massachusetts, campus. Post-October 7th, the volunteers dithered. "I will not be calling any of my classmates to try to encourage them to donate to Harvard," said Tally Zingher, 46, a lawyer and entrepreneur who has earned 3 degrees at Harvard University and served as a workhorse volunteer, calling friends and raising money from her undergraduate class, every year since graduating. "There are plenty of better places that I feel my classmates can use their philanthropy and influence." Longtime volunteer fundraisers are now pulling back. Larry Carson, 52, a former president of the Harvard Club of St. Louis, is working to remove Harvard as a beneficiary of the estate plan he made more than 2 decades ago. When another alum, Adrian Ashkenazi, received an email in October from a San Fernando Valley alumni interviewing team asking him to commit to meeting with prospective students, he declined. I replied immediately that I wasn't going to be able to do these interviews because I had a difficult time encouraging anybody to go to Harvard at the moment, given the moral failures that I was seeing from the students and the administrators, said Ashkenazi, 49, a co-founder of the new Harvard College Jewish Alumni Association, which led the switch to $1 donations as a way to send a message. Zingher, too, is planning to give just $1, joining hundreds of other former students in a symbolic protest. Around 1,600 Harvard alumni have threatened to cut donations over the college's handling of antisemitism. We never thought we would have to argue for recognition of our own humanity, they wrote. Clearly, Harvard is battling a huge perception problem here, as its well-oiled funding machinery is thrown out of gear. Such has been the discomfort that the business school has postponed sending out some solicitation letters signed by alumni until next year, according to people familiar with the matter. This is a huge sign that the donor and alumni counterpunch has hit Harvard, where it hurts the most. According to Moody's Investor Service, total fundraising is about 12% of Harvard's annual revenue. Harvard would suffer big time if alumni dissatisfaction led to a meaningful dent in donations. Way forward. Barak Sella, a student of public administration at the Harvard Kennedy School, told America Baby in a podcast interview that Israel and world Jewry need to stop thinking like a small, separate country and a small, weak nation. We need to get into seriously strategic gear. We must demand profound changes to change academia, establish our own institutions, and raise money from the right places, as well as strengthen Israeli academia. But is creating alternative programs and new choices the only option to stem the rot that has plagued Harvard and Co.? Kenneth Stern, director of the Bard Center for the Study of Hate, believes this is time to invest more in the campuses. If we're truly concerned about what's happening on campus, there are creative ways to address it. I'd like to see more effort spent on how to build campuses that have a better understanding of human hatred, he said. Universities should hew more closely to the 1967 University of Chicago's Calvin Report and strive to remain neutral on political and social matters, says Stern. Peter Wood from the National Association of Scholars, NAS, believes that the ouster of Ms. Claudine Gay is just a start in the long, drawn-out process of reforming the mess in American academia. He advocates a 3-step formula. First, to observe, document, and publicize what is happening in higher education. Second, clarify which problems legislation can fix and persuade elected leaders to fix them. The third is to roll back the walls of judicial and regulatory protection that higher education has succeeded in gaining from sympathetic courts and agencies. Will it all help to bring the universities back to their original mission of creating leaders for tomorrow? Only time can tell. The Jewish donors and alumni have fired the first shots and tasted blood. Safe to say that the cleanup has begun in all earnest. What about the Indian donors? Like their American counterparts, many Indian donors are motivated purely by the lure of an easy seat at the high table of the Ivy League Alumni Club. Admittedly, donating to Harvard and Company is an easy way to place your contact details in a global Rolodex of key decision-makers. But have they ever wondered about the aftermath of their actions? Naveen Jindal, who from his personal fortune gave $200,000, and from his company Jindal Steel and Power Limited, JSPL, $2.3 million to the University of Texas at Dallas, after which the university renamed its School of Management after him. In return, employees of JSPL and associates would be eligible for executive programs at the university. Shiv Nader donated to create the Shiv Nader Professor of Engineering Chair at Carnegie Mellon University. Ratan Tata, who earned a degree in architecture from Cornell University in 1962, gave $50 million to Cornell in 2008 for agriculture and nutrition programs and the education of Indian students at Cornell. In 2010, the Tata Trusts gave $50 million to Harvard Business School to fund a new academic and residential building on its campus, named Tata Hall. Anand Mahindra, vice chairman and managing director of Mahindra & Mahindra Group, has given $10 million to the Humanities Center at Harvard in honor of his mother, Indira Mahindra. N.R. Narayana Murthy gifted $5.2 million to Harvard University Press to be managed by his son Rohan Murthy to publish translations of Indian classics. His colleague from Infosys, Nanda Nilekani, donated $5 million to Yale University to underwrite the Yale India Initiative. The list goes on and on. The critical question, however, remains: have these donations helped India in any way? Have they helped America and the world develop a finer sense of India's problems and policies? Have they managed to portray the Indian way of solving problems in development and social justice? No, and yet nada. Despite such sizable donations, the American academia continued hosting biased events like dismantling Hindutva, and the American media kept pillorying India's achievements in vaccine developments, space technology, etc., while raising a hue and cry over its first civilizational victory in rebuilding its most prominent temple in Ayodhya recently. Maybe it's time for Ratan Tata or Anand Mahindra to do a Ken Griffin by picking up the phone and calling up the Harvard board for an explanation. Maybe it's high time for the vast Indian alumni in the US and India to join hands and register their protest against the insensitive portrayal of Hindu customs and their temples. Can the Indians, too, rise and stand for their faith and pull off what the Jews did post-October 7th? Now is the time for the C-suites to make their global presence felt. Perhaps the Indian solution lies at home. In a significant philanthropic gesture, Gautam Adani, the chairman of the Adani Group, announced on January 22nd that he would sponsor 14 students to pursue Ph.D.S. in Indology. He said this initiative coincides with the auspicious occasion of the consecration of the Ayodhya Ram Temple. All that is needed now is 100 more corporations coming forward and announcing initiatives similar to Adani's. Who knows, the taming of Harvard over the next few years might even coincide with the unleashing of Jewish and Indian academe.